So we're going to be talking about birth order, but it's the Rayid method of birth order, and it's actually totally different than anything you've ever heard on birth order. You might have heard that certain birth orders relate to certain personalities, but this is much more complex. It's actually looking at all of the past. So it's really a family dynamics. So it's not just a set birth order. It's looking at what we call the Rayid Family Dynamics. So looking at the patterns, what's passed down in terms of the epigenetics, as well as what's happening within the family system. So it should be very interesting to understand for many reasons. One, to understand yourself, where you fall in, and your personality might be affected by how you're interacting with the world. So how you come in and what your birth order is will actually affect how you might behave, how you function, what some of your needs would be. They also might affect, say, what some of the best types of fields you might want to go into. But then as parents, it's actually really helpful to understand our children better. So if we can understand how our children operate, what their personalities are like, and how that affects them. I mean, if we think about it, any of us that have had multiple children, we're sometimes amazed, well, how do we have, 2 or 3 children that are so different? They grew up in the same household. What's happening here? Well, you can really look at the lineage that they come from, and how that lineage is passed down through the parents and grandparents to better understand them, and ultimately to better support and guide them on their journey through life. So that's really where we're going to be taking it. We're going to spend some time going over some of those birth order positions, and then actually demonstrating how Denny will do a consult and explain it and map it all out. So I'm going to pass it off to Denny Johnson right now.
Hi. So those of you who have not met me before, my passion is understanding the dynamics of the human being and the family, and I've been involved in some form of research relative to the iris, or the birth order, or the what's called cycles and seasons. I've been at this for about 40 years, and I've traveled far and wide, and I would say that I've learned a lot, but I've probably made as many mistakes as things I learned. And the information that I'm about to impart, if you can use it, it is designed to be a treasure for you to use to guide yourself and your family, and it's virtually unlike any other form of family understanding or genetics or birth order orientation. That said, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of 6 brothers and 6 sisters. And then we'll determine how that happens, and then what happens when you have nuclear families, people come together with different numbers of children, or what happens when the girl is born behind a boy or behind 3 boys. We'll distinguish all of that. Now, the long-term benefit has to do with understanding yourself first, so that you understand your relationship to your own siblings and or your relationship dynamics with your parents, and how sometimes it feels different with one or the other. And you might notice an association that you might have with one of your grandparents. And eventually what you find out is all 6 of the boys, if we can see that from this angle on this, well, that's the screen.
Oh, there we go.
Is that enough light on that? I'm wondering.
I'll come up close so they can see it.
You want to hold it?
I'll just hold it there for a second so you can.
What you're looking at is 6 boys, that's the triangles, 6 girls, the circles, and you're seeing red, which is correspond to the father's family, blue from the mother's family, And you'll find that there's a binary system where one is from one side, the other is from the other side. And what I mean by that is, this is now what's called the methylation line or the epigenetic line, where you'll find out that even though they have the same number of genes from both sides of the family, they have a tendency to turn on more from one side or the other, and they acquire the, if you will, the crystals of the gene code, and those crystals are now recognized to be the primary reason that initiates a disease and or some other form of physical symptom. So if I'm, for example, when I'm saying it at number 1, if we can see that clearly from there, I'm not sure. Number 1 son primarily derives blue from the mother's side and mother's father. Now what that means is he has more influence coming from the mother's genetic selection than the father's, and he has a specific way he contributes to the father that's very different from the other children. So all 6 boys, if you had 6 of them, they come from different sides of the family. So the second son comes from father's side, and the number 2 corresponds to the second triangle here. That's father's side. Number 3, it's 3 over here, that's mother's father. 4 is father's father, and so on. 5 and 6, they're all spread out. The same thing is true for the girls, they alternate.
I just wondered if you had an adopted or a foster child, how would that fit in?
There's always an exception to every rule, and how it fits in is it affects the social dynamics. First, we look first at the genetic pattern called the genetic number, and the birth order sequence follows the father. So if the father has 3 children, and then it goes 1, 2, and 3, depending on the gender of it. If he adopts somebody that's older or fits in the middle, it affects them socially, but it doesn't affect their genetic endowment. So we'll look at the genetic number as it relates to the father. So if I say the father has 6 daughters in a row, then each one of these 6 daughters, they are from a different genetic line in the family tree. So for example, number 1 girl is primarily from father's mother's line. Number 2 is from mother's line. And you begin to recognize that the influence coming from the mother, if you're number 2, has a stronger influence. If you're number 1 girl, the relationship to the father and the father's mother is very impactful. But what this also means is whatever, if you're number 1 girl, whatever was going on in the father's mother, you got in some way or another. What I mean by got, it's now known that stressful events are coded into the DNA in little protein crystals that they now recognize that this used to be junk DNA, but now it's the methylation line of crystals that become memories of stress in previous generations. They tag along down here and they wait like little time bombs to explode in some form or another. So that basically now becomes the foundation of genetic changing in the CRISPR system, which is genetic engineering. They're now designing pharmaceuticals to match these crystallizations. And this same understanding about gene codes is what they're doing to manipulate the genes with viruses. And they are doing some very good work. They're doing things with spina bifida in the womb. They can now genetically engineer where the unloving, if I will call it unloving or stressful gene came from. They can cut it out and they can put in a new one, and the child's born normal. They're doing this with sickle cell anemia. They're doing it with this with MS. They're going to do this with dozens of diseases in the next few years, that they can genetically assess each child's genetic composition and predict where they got an unresolved emotion from one of the ancestors, and genetically engineer it out if you choose to. That's what the new science is. That's not woo-woo stuff. That's present day activity. That's really going on. You know, now I'm an advocate that what created the genetic coding going into children is part of a continuation of engineering that gives us the opportunity to develop our children and grandchildren and leave them something positive. Now, unfortunately, much of the history, maybe yours is different than mine, a lot of the history in my family, well, it's gone through war after war in generations, World War II and World War I. My great-grandparents on this level were all in the American Civil War, and there's been a lot of violence since then. All of that emotional violence is coded inside the genetic code coming down to me, given to my children and grandchildren. I'm saying that we all have enormous amounts of unresolved emotional feelings inside of us, and that if we would learn how to be able to address them, we might be able to endow future generations with a little less suffering. Maybe we can't give them total peace on earth yet, but we might be able to give them the beginning of something that would be genuinely healthy and useful. Now, I'm suggesting that by being able to understand the gender sequences, there is so much information about the difference between number 1 son and number 2 son and number 3. Now, most of this information is written already in a book that will describe 1, 2, and 3 boy and any number of girls. So I won't go into the exact personality of each one of them, but I'm more interested in suggesting that there be something that you can do with it. Now, we also have a case study of at least one family today where we have a situation that is somebody has a difficult physical pattern and had an accident. What is it possible for us to do to be able to assist this young person to be able to maybe correct the situation in their body and or at least adapt it in such a way that they become better capable of functioning in society? So we're going to talk about what that looks like. Now, later on, you might ask yourself, why do I need to think about or study 6 boys when I don't have any sons? Why do I need to study 6 girls when I only have 1 girl or 2? Why are the other ones important? Well, for me, this just happens to be the operator's manual to a spaceship. Well, call it what you want. This is the operator's manual for how the human being grows, lives, produces its own life, opportunities, health, well-being. These 6 boys and these 6 girls, for me, they correspond to glands, organs, body systems, 12 different glands, 12 different organ systems. Yes, all of these relate to how you function inside your own body. So I would suggest that, yes, knowing 6 girls, even if I'm a man, oh, by the way, whether you believe it or not, women have a lot more to do with the world than we have considered in the past. And by doing this work, I recognize that there are grandmothers in my family who are involved in my digestion, my assimilation, my capacity to go to the toilet, my kidneys, my bowels, my spleen, and my sleeping at night, my serotonin, my skin, that they're all involved in some aspect of me. And they are primarily responsible for my capacity to go into the future, and they hold all my previous memories. No, wait. I'm saying that there are functions inside the human being where all of your previous memories are stored. Wherever you want to call that, some people say it's specifically the brain, other people say it's another state of consciousness. Wherever it is, all of the memories of my family tree are held in place by a group of women in my family tree. So I think it's significantly important if I'm going to want to change something about myself, I learn to cooperate with the women inside of me who have the capacity. You've heard the saying that behind any successful man, there is a woman. Well, that's true. And that turns out to be inside of me. There are women who either help me be successful and healthy, or they bring to me the unresolved emotions from the family tree for me to have a symptom, and they know exactly when to bring it, how to bring it. And after the study of this system over a number of decades, I no longer believe in a coincidence or an accident. I personally believe that if somebody breaks a leg, it wasn't an accident. If somebody hits a tree or a telephone pole, it was something that was timely in their family tree to be repeated. So if there's violence in the family tree, there comes a moment further down, generations later, where there is emotional or physical violence in the brain or the body or the social dynamics. So if there's depression or jealousy in a great grandmother, it comes down and affects a gland, an organ, and a body system. So, I mean, it's a hard thing to believe, but I'm sorry, it's your family that's going to kill you. And I mean that literally, because the unresolved emotional issues going in the genetics of your family tree, they're causing you to not feel something or try to deny something. They're feeding your impulses, your hormones, your addictions, your self-sabotage, your denial, your eventual dementia, your stroke, your heart attack, and your cancer is primarily due to how they have unresolved emotional memory.
And it's predictable, right?
And it's predictable not only about where it is, who has it, what it does to the body. So when somebody has a physical or emotional symptom, I'm interested in where that symptom is in the body that would correspond to a place in the family tree. So I map the body in correspondences to these numbers, and later on I'll show you how 1 is at the bottom of the torso, 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 in the throat, 6 in the head. So if somebody has a trauma to the head, I look at number 6, wherever number 6 came from. If somebody has a particular skin condition, I go to another location. If somebody has a respiratory phenomenon, I go to another location. Kidney, gallbladder, liver, heart, I just go to different locations. And those are, pretty successfully mapped out. Now, for me, it's not so much a challenge of mapping it out. It comes down to what do you do with it? But before we go to the how you use it, let's clarify what we mean by 6 girls and what's the difference when you have a girl that's number 1 versus a girl that's behind a boy, she's a 1. And what's the difference when you have a number 1 girl in the first position versus a number 1 girl in the second position versus a number 1 girl in the third position versus number 1 girl in the fourth position, and so on. What's the difference in each one of these number 1 girls? I know this is a lot of information. You're not going to be quizzed on it at the end. Don't worry about it. This is what's the difference when the number 1 girl comes first? Well, the number 1 girl comes first, it's linked right away to father's mother. But when a number 1 girl comes what we call second behind a boy, she has what we call a 2 energy first, so she's very much what's called a 2 behind a boy, but she also has number 1, so it's kind of combined. She gets the benefit of 2 and 1. So when she's 3 behind a boy and number 1, she gets what we call number 3 behind a boy, so she gets the quality of the 3-boy grandfather combined with her number 1. If she's number 4, oh, I know it's a lot. If she's a 4th behind 3 boys, then she takes on the qualities of the number 4 boy combined with the number 1. And they make really cool differences. And you can get into the nuances of how it affects their body type, because each one of these girls ends up with a different body type. Phew, lots of information. So this is what happens when and we could go on through this of a number 1 girl behind 5 brothers and so on. This will give you a clue about how this works. Later on, yes, we can do what happens when you have a boy, girl, girl, and this is what's called the 3 behind a boy, second daughter. Genetic number 3 behind a boy first, what's called the three-boy position. Even though it's a girl, it's third behind a boy is what it means. Gender number, second girl. So she combines 3 behind a boy and the qualities of being the second daughter genetically. Now what happens, I'm sorry about the confusion on this, what if they adopt somebody else first who just happens to be another boy, but he is adopted from outside the family biologically? Now we have a nuclear family, we have changes because we end up with this girl being genetically still a 3 behind a boy second daughter, but now has a social dynamic of being raised behind an older adopted brother that came in. So she has a genetic pattern of a 3 and a gender number of a 2, but now she's number 4 behind a boy first. So there's a change going on, and I'm actually an advocate of nuclear families. And the reason for it is the benefit in the long run gives them a greater amount of diversity. I'm actually in favor of larger families because it gives everybody more of a dynamic to be able to circulate and learn things. These 6 girls are completely different. If you're a number 1 girl and you have a younger sister, any of you are like that? I mean, you obviously have an older sister.
Yeah,
You know that number 1 girl and number 2 girl, they're not alike. They are so different as to be almost exceptionally different. Number 2 girl will never submit to the control of number 1. Number 1 girls like to believe because they came first, they have the right to control.
we do.
They have the right to control, you know, and they are very capable, responsible human beings. And sometimes the number 1 girl is changing diapers very soon. She's breastfeeding very soon. She might be 3 or 4 and she has a little sister and she's carrying her around while having a bottle. And so she's growing up by the time she's 5. And by the time she's 7, she's worried and she's frustrated and she's tired and she's 7. And she has 3 younger brothers or sisters or whatever. A lot of burden goes on the number 1s. So later on you find out that number 1 has a sequence. Well, what she does in the home, sooner or later she's going to want to do in the community. That's called 3. Just by diameter. Sooner or later she thinks that she should take on the whole world at something and she expands. Now I know that first of all, she starts out controlling her family early on. By the time she's 2, okay, maybe 3 at the latest, she looks at her mother and says, anything you can do, I can do better. And she does that in the house. And she says, that man you married, he's mine. And she does that. She has a very strong will of determining that she would rather have a relationship with the father than the mother. And she imitates anything the mother does, but does not listen to a word she says. So if you want her to dance, you better dance, and then she'll dance better. If you want her to swear, well, all you have to do is start swearing, and she'll swear more than you and better at it. So number 1 girl emulates the mother's way of treating herself, treating other people, treating men. She emulates it, makes it stronger. So you have to be, as a mother, very aware that your number 1 girl will look at her father and listen to her father, but not her mother. And we could go and describe number 1 girl for a long time, and there are little booklets about how to raise your number 1 girl if you have a little one. There are certain things that I would suggest you learn how to do very quickly. If you're a father, you come home, you have a wife and a number 1 girl, but who do you think gets to daddy first? The little girl does. She comes running because she's watching, and then if you're a father and you lean down and you kiss your number 1 girl, then you ignore your wife, you're in for a life of misery. Because they remember everything. Number 1 girls are like elephants, they never forget, and they're the matriarchs. They're a matriarch of something. So first they're a matriarch of their own home and family, and we'll describe the implications of that for a long time. Then they want to extend their matriarchy out into the community and do some kind of public service. They're going to tell everybody else's families how to be their family. They're going to be nurses, doctors, lawyers, they're going to teachers, they're going to step out there and go, I have a family and it should look like this and yours should look like this too. That's at 3. Then a little later stage of their life, they get a little bored with the, the locality of the national or the local, and they want to go global. So what is it like for a number 1 girl to go global? When she can't see them, she can't hear them, she can't directly talk to them, she can't hold them, because number 1 girls like to hold babies and they like to touch people and they love to feed people. And if you love her, you better eat her food because her self-image is on how well she feeds you. Sorry about that, but number 1 girls, they usually they're taught to feed. Number 2 girls sometimes don't care if you eat. But that's different than number 1. They're very different about how they operate in the world. But if you understand how a number 1 girl moves from self through the family to the community to a larger diameter, you can enable her to grow at each level and how to be able to utilize her past lessons and make her life more successful. And I have some suggestions about how to do that. That's number 1 girl. Now, this tendency is the same thing that's true for number 2, but in a different way. And we'll describe the differences in that. And this is not a full birth order class. This is more about the theory of how this fits together and maybe how we might be able to use it. So I must tell you, I'm really, I'm an advocate of the wise use of information like this to enable us to have healthier lives and how it works. And I'm going to give you some suggestions about how to do it for yourself. Now, before I leave this 6 and 6, does the very concept of 6 boys coming from 6 different grandfathers make sense to you? I mean, it's there, by the way, and you can see it and understand it. But how many of you met all 8 of your great-grandparents? I certainly didn't. I met 1 grandmother. That was it. I didn't meet any of the other ones. I only met 1. And, well, that one wasn't very nice either. So, so that didn't give me a whole lot of hope for the whole family.
I'm lucky I only met 1.
So you get the idea that the 6 different sisters genetically come from 6 different grandmothers? Do you know what the 3 grandmothers from your father's side actually do? They hold together your self-identity, your will. They digest your food. They handle your reproductive tract. They heal your body. They're constantly reproducing your body. And they're constantly transmitting to the body all of your feelings. No, wait. Did you get that?
I think so.
There is a part of you that's constantly recording and transmitting the emotional result of every feeling you have. So if you have an unresolved frustration about something, whether it's politics or doctors or lawyers or priests, and you have an emotional reaction, it automatically takes that reaction and catalogs it like a symphony and takes it off to a specific location in your body, and it's remembered. And then sooner or later you have an ache in your right knee or your left elbow or something and it just accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. You have 3 very smart grandmothers on your father's side of the family. I urge you to get to know them. What does that mean? Your father's mother, did you ever meet her? If not, I urge you to get everything you can about her and get to know her. If she's still alive, oh, what a blessing that is. Go to her and ask her about her parents and ask her about her mother-in-law. Did I mention mother-in-law? Because you realize, of course, that these 2 families, they were not genetically related until their children got together. Have you heard of Romeo and Juliet and the Hatfields and McCoys and a few other things? Have you heard about the possibility that maybe they were a different economic class, a different racial group or cultural group or different religion, and your son is not good enough for our daughter? Well, have any of you ever had an emotional issue with a mother-in-law or an in-law, or no, I'm the only one? Okay, so this is what happens. So if you get a chance to talk to your father's mother, oh, by the way, you better like her because she's ruling your pelvic cavity and your hips and your bones. Now, I know yet we haven't classified where all the organs and glands are, but she's responsible for your bones and your base and the foundation that supports you. She's responsible for sustaining your life. Wow, how important is that? Some would say it's the will to live, the will to survive.
So if that person committed suicide?
It's not an ideal situation for you. You might call it a demerit
Okay.
in some form or another, yes. Now, if there's been multiple incidents of some form of diminishing, whether that is by drugs or suicide or behavior or reaction or war or violence or who knows, that's why I would urge you, if you have your father's mother, sit down with them and be prepared for them to lie. Because most grandparents only want to tell you the nice stuff, and the older generation says, well, that's gone, they're dead, thank God they're dead. And they'll tell you only the nice things that they could remember about them. That's typically how most grandparents, oh yeah, my parents were, yeah, no, they're fine. Yeah, I like to go back to my grandmother and go, grandmother, what was it like as a child with your own parents? And I'm suggesting that any increase in the knowledge of the feeling of a specific grandparent has a numerical increase in your capacity to feel. I'll try that again. On a scale of 1 to 100, how much do you know your father's father?
Zero.
Then you're missing a treasure, because this particular grandfather is the specific orientation that regulates the thymus, also regulates joy, laughter, celebration, friendship, beauty, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So on a scale of 1 to 100, I would suggest if you only know him like a 1, any effort to know him would long-term benefit your capacity to increase your capacity to feel that category of your life. Now, I've done programs where I give you information on all 12 of them, and this would be the universal effect of father's father on anyone, which will, by the way, very important. It's called the arterial function of the heart. Fairly important. It's the arterial function of the 4. On the other side, mother's mother. What would you guess that, on a scale from 1 to 100, your mother's mother?
100%.
You knew her. Nice. So it will give you a couple of big marks to get started with. Now, can you increase your appreciation? Why would mother's mother?
Mother.
Your great
Sorry, didn't know her. Knew about her. I have about 5%.
I'll give you that much.
Okay.
Now, I'm suggesting that this just happens to be the other side of the heart. What's the other side of the heart? The ability to be able to receive the blood.
Uh-oh.
The ability to be able to allow, receive, open, the ability to be able to not judge, and a few other very important things. Do you know what congestive heart failure is when the left side of the heart refuses to receive? Varicose veins and a few other things happen, but I'm suggesting that this is true for all of the organs in the body. That by your desire to want to appreciate, and I urge you to get in touch with this one, your mother's father's mother. What a nice place. Do you like your skin? It's her. Do you like your serotonin at night or in the morning? Sleepy?
Wait, I'm stuck behind. So this is the mother's father's mother,
Excellent.
and she does the skin and the serotonin levels.
Yes, she's pineal.
Okay.
And that also means OCD type things, anxiety things, fear of the unknown, phobias, fear of the invisible, the dark, night terror, flower pollen allergies. And what do we have going on in the world right now? Fear of the invisible,
Germaphobe.
paranoia, conspiracy theories. They're out to get us. You got to watch those, big tech people. You got to watch, somebody. They're all gonna get you. The big guy that. That's all ruled by one place. So if your mother had a difficult relationship with your father, you better not be here because you'd probably be coughing.
If your mother had a different relationship with your own father.
With her father.
Yes,
With her father?
if your mother had a difficult relationship with her father, this is what's called the lung line. The ability to be able to breathe. It's an important function, right? It's a respiratory function. But his mother happens to be the nighttime and the skin. So if he was abandoned by her and not loved by his daughter, then your children down here are going to end up with skin issues and respiratory dysfunction. No, wait, this is normal. We all have it to some degree or another. So I'm saying to you, why wouldn't you take just a little while to go father's father's mother? The single most important place for regenerating the human body. If you can increase that just one little iota because you appreciate who she is, or you increase your appreciation of the feeling components of all 12 of these, your capacity to feel changes. Why would you want the capacity to feel? I mean, I know it's a strange question to ask, but the little things you might like joy, laughter, play, celebration, peace, gratitude, compassion, giving and receiving love, all the things require feeling. So I'm going to suggest that the slight increase in the desire to want to feel will probably bring you some trouble. Why? I'm going to suggest to you that by the desire to want to increase your capacity to feel these different parts of yourself, your family genetics, it's going to help you begin to feel those things that you have denied since your conception. And why would you want to feel the things inside you that you've been denying for decades? Because there is what I call circuits. How did your mother feel about her mother? That's a feeling. How did your grandmother feel about her daughter? Oops, that's a circuit. How did your grandmother feel about her mother? And so on. How did this great-grandmother feel about her daughter? That's a circuit. So what happens when the great-grandmother dies? What happens to the circuit? That's what you got, the circuit. So inside you are dozens of circuits of how people felt about each other. You remember this family over here that fought in the Romeo and Juliet and they didn't like each other and the grandmothers were hating each other in some way? What you got was a circuit. That circuit now goes down to the children, and their 1 and their 3 and their 5 don't cooperate, and their nervous system and their ability to assimilate food is weird, and they're out of balance, and they tremble when they walk. All because of 2 women didn't get along. And when they died, where does it go? Down to somebody else's grandchildren. Wait, this doesn't need to be hopeless. The feeling of this man for his father and this father for his son, this is a circuit. All of these are circuits. This is what the crystals bring. They bring the unresolved feelings that circulate in little circles. And these circuits will continue to do one thing. Now, I know this is a little far out, they will bring you people. So if there's a particular conflict here between this grandfather and his father, and this is a circuit, and you just happen to be the number 4 linked up to here, if you just happen to be the number 4 son, here comes somebody to bring you this circuit right there called a collision, or an accident, or an emotional attack, or a violence, that whatever this was has a content to it. Here comes somebody bringing you what we call the law of attraction to exactly duplicate the memory of that emotionally. So is this a little too much too fast?
I
Or,
think it's fascinating.
you know, this is how the family function works. Wouldn't it be nice if you go, thank you very much, but I think I want to deal with this a little bit. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, thank you, and thank you very much, thank you. Wouldn't it, I mean, I'm an advocate that, I use the word, by the way, gratitude. Thank you for serving me so well. Thank you for giving me this genetic connection. Thank you for being part of my life. Thank you for that side of my heart, my pancreas and so on, my parathyroid. Thank you for all of that. Now I would like to be able to live my own life without your influences. Fair enough?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you like to be myself? Thank you for all that. That's why I'm urging you to consider that the study of these birth order patterns is more than a study of that. It's a study of the energy that flows up the front of your body and down the back. Do you know that you have energy that goes up the front of your body and down the back? Sure you do. We just said behind every man, the back, there's a woman. There's an energy that goes up the front and goes down the back. This is a huge circuit, and there is energy that comes up the front, goes down the back, and if the women behind you are happy, you're doing very well, and if they're not, you're going to have a tough week or month or life. I would suggest you fall in love with the 6 women behind you, and things are going to get easier. Wait, is that too weird? I'm saying a little increase of appreciation, love, and gratitude for a grandmother will go a long way.
They're a little dead though.
Ah, that's what you think. That's part of the problem. Are they really?
No.
No. No, are they really?
Just for knowledge purpose though. How do
The
I?
knowledge purpose.
Yeah.
Yes, there may be ways now to get more knowledge than they would want you to have. You know, you can do a lot of research now on all of the ancestral programs, and you can find out more about your grandparents than they even remember. Or you can just desire to want to know the feeling about your great grandmother. Is it possible for you to feel a great grandmother, or ask about, or think about, or meditate on, or pray about a particular grandmother, and it's capable of helping you feel, remember, resolve something? Yes, I'm an advocate that that's true. So we have promised also to do a case study. So I'm assuming, because I thought about making this phone call, that we are going to do a case study on your family, your daughter, right? I thought about actually calling her to get her permission. I presume it's okay we talk about her?
Were we doing me or her? Because I can only give permission for myself.
That's correct.
You
So
want me to call her?
that would be nice.
See if she'll answer.
I mean, I thought about it on the way over going, you know, if we're going to be talking about
Maybe we should
somebody,
just talk about me.
yeah, under the circumstances,
Interesting, isn't it? So I'm here at the
can you
I'm
text
here
her?
at
She's texting her now.
She might answer a text better, or,
She answered.
oh, she answered.
She's at her friend's house.
Oh, this will be interesting to see what she has to say. I'm hoping that she gives us permission, but she's there's a boy, she's behind the boy.
What? So can I just jump in?
Sure.
So I know we're talking about all of our ancestors, literally, and our entire family system, and how our birth order is structured tells us a bit about how we come in, but it's also, we have these 12 grandparents that are literally ruling epigenetically our organ systems. So if they're ruling those systems, you're suggesting that we actually feel gratitude for those grandparents. Now, say those grandparents were, as you said, mean, or there wasn't positive things, or now we're left with, you know, skin problems, or circulatory problem, or heart problem, and it's directly mapped to that family. Can you explain a little bit about how that can be an opportunity for healing through those circuits? Would that be noticing when we are unloving, or noticing when there's a challenge with that external, that you said that there's these law of attraction events? It's how we process, or how we feel about those law of attraction events. Is that what you're getting at?
I think you covered it pretty well, actually. The opportunity to increase our appreciation, sensitivity, to feel a particular grandmother, regardless of what her life was like. Sometimes it is best if we have compassion for the life that they went through in their early years. Sometimes that wasn't easy in the 1930s or something, you know, or great grandmother did that, or they went through violence or war, or they emigrated for somewhere from a famine. Boy, I don't know of a single grandparent in my family tree that had an easy existence. So I'd like to have compassion for the nature of the human activity and what its impact is on all of us. So yeah, that's where I like to go first, is just appreciating its overall influence. So we're going to do a little case study on a situation where, would you like to take a moment and explain your daughter's accident in some form? Would you do that for me?
5 years ago, my daughter was a passenger in a car. The girl was not supposed to have her in the car because she was she was only 17 and hadn't had the license for long enough. And she was going 83 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. So my daughter took the brunt of everything. Her head broke a telephone pole in 3 places. Her pelvis wasn't attached to her spine. Her C1 broke off, and we were told she'd be a quadriplegic and in a vegetative state for life, and to put her in a nursing home 5 years ago. She is quite the strong person, and today she works, and she's away with friends right now, and there's a lot of struggles, but she's really unbelievable. But her accident was one where they say she's at 1% of how she could have healed from that type of accident.
So part of the challenge I'm going to ask you to consider is the implications that whatever it was that drew her to that moment, and that she was involved in something that was obviously very tragic and painful, is something that was already teed up and triggered in the family tree, that likely has to do with unresolved emotional patterns from the family tree. So after meeting with her, I like to consider myself an investor. And the type of investor I am is to invest a few hours in your daughter to encourage her development, health, understanding, and eventual wisdom. She's capable, with some support, of influencing thousands or tens of thousands of people for decades into the future. So I see that as an investment to encourage her to understand and cooperate with how to continue her personal development, and to show or teach other young people, or older ones too, what might be possible that she's recovered from and what she can do and how to do it. So I'm doing my best to have regular conversations with her to encourage her to recognize what it was that probably set her into motion. So for me, she was what we call number one girl behind a boy. So she's two behind a boy, one girl. The two behind a boy pattern means that she has a pattern we call fire. So she's a girl who has fire, physicality. So she's a physically driven fire type person with a strong mind. Mind because she's number one girl. Number one girls are typically verbal as well. So she's verbal combined with fire. And when you get these two together in this situation, they're usually pretty capable. So she already has what I used to call the wild horse capacity. That's a typical two behind a boy, fire, wild horse capacity. And when it has an orientation of how to use that emotion well, in a healthy way, she typically goes toward the father's family in which she has a relationship that works with her father that gives her the kind of orientation that would give her the ability to be able to succeed. Now, if there are breakdowns in that communication or breakdowns between father and his own mother, then we have some things that may affect her as well. So the strength of her relationship to her father's mother, her number one, this is a very important place. You remember how I said that this number one regulates the pelvic cavity and the bones. So when the pelvic is disconnected from the spine and the bones are broken in, how many bones are broken?
Oh, we have no idea because they were only fixing the ones that would save her.
So she had quite a number of them
Oh, I mean,
broken,
everything.
spine,
She was
neck, and
arm, hand, well, everywhere. She was just broken. Her chest, her sternum, her ribs, her.
so when something
By
like,
the way, her number one had
yes,
bone cancer.
so her number one grandmother has,
Started with breast and ended up in bone.
so both of those indicate by the symptoms the likelihood of her relationship to her own father. So
Not good.
not good.
No. So her father, they said they used to have to hide her because she was a second daughter. He had a son and two daughters, and he wanted another son. And so the story was that they would have to whisk her away to the neighbor when she was a baby so that if he came home drunk.
I see. So rejection, emotional violence
Rejection.
on that situation.
And then she ended up being an orphan a few years later. Her mom died too. Or they both died.
Okay, so we're saying that the number one grandmother that she's associated with had, well, a difficult life. And her relationship to her own father, now, just so you know, this position called number 6, to me, is the brain. It's also, sometimes I call it the hammer. It's the lightning bolt. It's whenever you break something, stroke, heart attack, bones, it's usually contributed by one location. If his relationship toward his own daughter was not loving, and there was an emotional or physical attack or rejection, it sets up the likelihood that there was, well, a lot of charge in this location. And you're talking about this grandmother having cancer of her own, whether breast or bones. Get it? This is one of those circuits I'm talking about of how the father felt about his daughter, how the daughter felt about her father, and there is obviously a component, and this is a time bomb waiting to happen. Then it turns out that there is an event, and there is a sudden, shocking, devastating blow to the 5, the neck and the spine and the pelvic region. For me, that is a preset condition in the family tree. Now, if she is the wild, fire-oriented one, and she goes out and she has a banging collision somewhere, to me, that's what I look about where something starts. So what would that mean to the rest of your family and your grandchildren? By the way, I'm an advocate of your great-grandchildren. I'm going to suggest that whatever you might do to help the grandchildren and great-grandchildren not to transfer this genetically down to their own children. And I have some suggestions about how that might occur, what you might be able to do. But I'm saying that she has a history here, and you and I both know that she has a tendency to be emotionally aggressive about what her opinion is about something. Now, one of the reasons she has that is because her mother is a #1 girl, right? You told me you were also a #1, and her grandmother?
#1.
So you have a #1, and then you have a #1, and then you have a #1. You know what it's like when you get 3 generations in a row of strong-willed, determined, controlling women who have daughters who want to be strong. Remember how they imitate what mother does?
Yes.
So then they go, oh yeah, I'm going to be stronger than the both of you, and I'm going to be wild, and oh, by the way, there's a telephone pole waiting for me. But you remember the other side we talked about? Do you know your father's mother?
Do I know my father's mother?
No,
I
your
met
mother's
her.
father.
She died when I was 5.
So she died when you were 5.
I met her once or twice. We did not have a very thorough relationship.
If you were a #1 girl, your primary relationship is father's mother and her mother.
And I have no idea who that one was.
That's one of the places I would go to help yourself. Just to recognize that how your relationship was to your father, well, could be suspect.
Suspect in what?
Well, if this has gone on between this man and his daughter, then it has a tendency to go down to mother to son, and then son down to daughter.
Right.
You get that?
Yes.
Now, if that's happening over here, the likelihood is could be happening here.
It's coming to you.
Yeah, from my dad.
No, wait, I'm saying something I'm trying to be practical about. If you see something on the opposite side of the family, if you flip it over, there's always going to be a mirror. Because otherwise you wouldn't marry a man who didn't have perfectly the genetic mirror to bring you exactly what you needed to feel. Is that
Yeah, no.
too personal, too fast? Or?
No.
No, I'm saying that this is important just to be able to see how the dynamics works.
And that's the least likeliest person I can probably pick any information on, is that.
Well, I have
Question
no information at the top.
On your 8.
0. And I only have 3 of the second level.
And you're probably fortunate to have those because
I know of my mother's, or my father's mother. I'm a namesake of hers, but she died when my dad was 9. So that's it. And she's in Italy. Done. I mean, the other ones, forget it. And I have no history beyond them.
okay, so
So you then, what is it? Just you call upon your feelings and memories to try and find the connections?
there are multiple modalities for you to consider how to increase your feeling and your understanding of the ancestry you didn't know. I turned out to be lucky here 4 years ago. A cousin of mine had been doing the entire genealogy on the family and had it back to Sir Francis Drake, you know, and going back to the 14th century. So that's why I didn't have any idea that my 8 grandparents were in the Civil War until that happened. I had no knowledge at all and almost didn't care because I didn't really comprehend that the unresolved emotional patterns would still be within my own genetic memory and or family. And I have tried several unusual ways of resolving that. And now I'm an advocate of the sincere desire to want to increase your capacity to know it. It will be automatically fed to you in a series of emotional experiences. Now, I just said something pretty wild. I said the sincere desire to want to increase your capacity to feel in those places that you're unaware of, or you've forgotten, or you're numb, or you're medicated in some form, because everybody's medicated in some form or another, because we're all existing in different combinations of denial, that you, by your sincere desire to want to increase your feeling, I'm suggesting that it can be fed to you incrementally in a series of emotional events.
Mhm.
The question is what would you do when you had an emotional event? So I'm going to suggest that there are ways for you to respond so that you can feel a circuit and begin to deal with the circuit rather than re-implement the circuit. Most people, when they have an emotional encounter with someone, they have a tendency to reject it or to avoid it or medicate it or say, no, it's your fault. And oftentimes it is their fault. It could be they ran into your car in a grocery store and you're in the parking lot, and it is their fault, but it's your law of attraction. What do you do in the moment where you're angry and upset? You're in the right, yes, you can be angry and blame them in some form or another, but there was a reason why you knew how to be there at exactly the right time and park your car in exactly the right location where they could back into it perfectly. So who are you going to blame under circumstances where you have an emotional attraction? And this is not designed to be yet a class about that. And just so you know, there's going to be a sequence of little classes like that. And the one that will probably start next time we have this class, whether that's next week or the week after, is how each one of these places in your family tree also corresponds to a different iris pattern. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the iris patterns, we have patterns of irises, and these are pictures, old ones, and you can see these different iris combinations. You'll see different colorations in each one of these. So I'm going to suggest, by looking at your iris, we have somewhat of a fingerprint of what you might have received from individual grandparents. So it's one of the ways to have a deepening opportunity to know the feelings stored inside of you by taking a close-up picture of your own eyes and either projecting it onto the screen and or making prints out of it. And each one of these little spots that you see, rounded loops or otherwise, those are emotional memories from somewhere in your family tree. You really want to know that much information. It's useful, quite frankly. I do it. And I'll just so I can be fair about this, I'll show you this one here, this poor deranged person.
Or deranged person because, oh, it's you.
It's mine.
Okay. All right.
It's the only way I can call this poor deranged person like this. Oh my God, grandmother, there you are. And so we've learned how to use the iris of the eye like a map. And I have a map for you of the positions. I now use different sectors like a pie to show which side, the left eye primarily from the mother's side of the family, the right eye from the father's side. And then now there you have your information. And it comes down to what are you going to do with it all? So we're going to do a class. I'm looking forward to it. I have approximately 30 new ones of these that just arrived today, actually. And I'm going to mount them on the walls.
How can we get one of those?
We're arranging for you to eventually have them photographed. And so you can get good quality photographs of them like this. This happens to be the best photography in the world from somebody who designed the camera to be able to do this, who just happens to be, hi John. He's on watching this. He thought his pictures were going to be, these are his pictures, by the way, his photography. He sent me more today, but I decided to wait until next time to do the iris constitutions. And because you are coming, we're going to do that case study on your daughter. And I want you to know that I very much enjoyed your daughter. And part of it is, my feeling is, like the memory of the investment, is that the rapport is necessary to encourage the confidence in change. So by using the iris, it increases the capacity to understand the Constitution. By understanding the birth order, that also increases the understanding or the empathy. And the establishment of that sense of rapport gives them the opportunity to trust you a little more about what you're saying. And the understanding that she's a 2 behind a boy, and I know that she has that fire tendency and what she's going to do. And then if she has the sudden shocking events at age, 18 or something, 19, then I know that there's a calendar in the family tree that would happen at 19 that's different than 39. So by the age that something arrives, it gives me clues about where it comes from, what it's about.
And that's because those genes get turned on at certain ages.
Yes, at certain ages, different hormones come out, right? And those hormones are regulated obviously by the brain functions. And we turn on the hormones of the hormones of the father's family between 16 and 32, and that's the fire hormones, where you know what it's like when you were 20 and you want to run around and be wild and crazy and kiss anybody that walks. Maybe that was only me. I don't. There's just that dynamic that happens. That's hormones turned on by the father's family. So if the hormones from the father's family are turned on, and there happens to be something in the family tree that creates a law of attraction event, then you have a symptom or a chaos or the beginning of a disease or a loss, or the number of possible symptoms is pretty profound.
But many of them are predictable based on birth order and iris.
Yes, they're predictable at a very early age. I mean, literally, I look at very small children and you see their blueprint and the likelihood of them eventually, whether they're 30, 40, or 50, having significant physical or emotional events is 99 percentile. I mean, so I'm suggesting that it's possible for parents to intervene in small children and understand the dynamics in their relationship that are facilitating the child to build upon the future problem. So it'd be nice to have known with Lee,
I think I did.
you know, but sometimes at that age, they're not going to listen anyway, open rebellion. So how do we convert a situation that she's in now to make it a useful example, give her the confidence to want to go forward? Part of what I've done to work with her is to see the potential in her drive. So I'm taking her wildfire drive and say, look, if you have that same fire inside you, you can use that with self-determination to change your condition. What would be nice if we understand the mechanics about how to be able to help you facilitate that change. So there are certain key things I would suggest that you do in sequence that would enable you to be able to help to move yourself along just a little more. And I feel like if she learns personal responsibility and how to be able to utilize her own emotions effectively, she not only gets better, she teaches other kids and adults how to do it. And life has changed for many other thousands of people without knowing it. So I consider that to be, you know, an opportunity and a personal quest to help her in that. Now, if we could do that with 2,000 or 3,000 children a year, we might be able to make a difference in the world. So I'm an advocate of what she's going through and how to help her, how to support her. And I believe, by the way, we all deserve that level of support. And part of that support comes from the logical understanding about how the body and mind works relative to the iris and the family dynamics, birth order pattern, and understanding the symptoms. I'm also a personal advocate of how to utilize the elements of nature to accentuate the flow of life force into the body. And there's plenty of documentation how nature changes health. I think that there are ways to utilize this understanding by the birth order phenomenon about how to be able to do that. And we're going to be advocating programs for people to be able to be involved in. And one of them would be into eyesight, of how to be able to use the family tree dynamics, the iris, the birth order function, and the symptoms to enable people to lose their eyesight less rapidly. I mean, there are people who are gradually losing their eyesight. It's very common in this work. Would you like to comment on any of that?
Well, one of the questions that I actually have is, yes, we understand looking at birth order, irises, and all of those patterns, looking at the social dynamics, there's certain predictors, things that we would most likely see, and that some of those can actually be prevented through how we parent and treat our children. So that's another one of the programs that we'll be running is birth order for parents, to be able to understand your children and support them along the way. I think for this particular case, though, I'm very curious to hear what you would recommend Lee's parents. So I know we're working with Lee and supporting her to recognize that she does have that fire. She has that drive. She's that 1% that has been able to walk and talk and hold a job when they said that she was basically going to be a vegetable at one point. So that verve is what kind of kept her going. So, you know, to have her feel that, tap into it, and then find ways to use it positively, as well as doing some of the vision therapy that we're doing to build some flexibility so she doesn't feel so stuck, are some of the things that we're doing. But I guess the question would be, you know, for her parents, what would you recommend?
Well, there's the certain reality that usually by the age of 8, the icing is on the cake. Meaning there's very little that parents can engage in directly to modify the content of a child. Under the age of 8, particularly under the age of 5, I think that the direct intervention, parents can do many different things to aid small children to facilitate the removal of pent-up damage. And I have a number of suggestions about how to do that on young children. But much past the age of 8, it requires their cooperation. It's now their responsibility to be engaged in it. And sometimes it requires whatever form of relationship you can develop. So it's like their responsibility for their own future progress. So that's true for her. But there's also influences that still occur that number one, girls still like to be better than their mother. And so if their mother is engaged in something healthy and optimistic and responsible, the number one girls still feel and see that, and they're eventually, number one girl wants to be mother's mother. She usually wants to tell mother what to do eventually. And if she does that in a healthy way, then she's a healthy daughter who's like the ring of a tree. She's just a healthier ring, and the whole family gets stronger. So I'm suggesting that it's not too late for you to do as much as you possibly can on a healthy way, and then she feels more comfortable to do that for herself, and she wants to emulate the fact that you're growing more because you want to grow, and then she will want to grow even more because she wants to do better than you. I mean, I'm not saying that happens every time, but it does happen. And I think that her feeling emotionally supported for her individuality, her responsibility, her optimism about the future. And I think that to do something like what she's trying to do, it's really nice to have an outside influence. That can be another woman who's a matriarch, who can help her understand what it feels like to be a father's mother. What does it really feel like? Because sometimes it does take a village, right?
To feel like a father's mother. Again, I just lost that piece.
That sometimes it takes wise women in a community to help young girls grow.
Okay.
And sometimes it doesn't matter so much whether or not they're biologically related, because it comes from the range called community. Community is where we work out our family issues with non-biological relatives.
Right. I think I got confused at the same thing because you went back and said father's mother.
And you were talking
Instead
about-
of
right.
Yes.
good influences all around.
Yes, good influences all around is somebody who's in a role that acts like a matriarch in some form. Take her under her wing and help her because she wants to. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a whole bevy of beautiful grandmothers capable of being able to talk to anyone's child? Wouldn't it be nice if we had communities that really facilitated the dynamics between wise women and children, rather than mask and social distancing? So we're in a challenging time period, and we're in an opportune time to change systems and change the way we approach our children, education, economies, and so on. So over these months, we're going to have a variety of different programs about how people might participate. And one of the programs that the first time we were here, we had 4 different programs that we were going to offer. We're offering. One of them that I mentioned was how to utilize nature and how to be able to facilitate that. Because some people just want to go outside and relate to nature in that way. And I have some suggestions about how understanding the family tree dynamics and how the sequences move. There's ways of moving it more effectively into the body or the mind. And I think that will have a potential result. So there'll be 4 different programs that we're offering, but what we're also offering is the opportunity to have your measurements and your eyesight, which you obviously have. Most of you already have your glasses or you've been there. And we're going to offer a 3-year program of a series of things and booklets for you to use so that you can come back 6 months or a year later, make the measurements and see if there are differences. So we believe that it's possible to make substantial differences, not only in eyesight, but in health. And that comes from the responsible use of the understanding of the dynamics in the family and feelings.
Have you created a workbook where someone can map out their own thing so they could study this?
So that's some of what I'm working on, trying to put together a clearer understanding. There's also on the Rayid International site, there's lots of graphics. So and Nellie, who's in Brazil, managing the Brazilian Rayid Facebook group, there's a lot of really amazing graphics that are helping to map things out. And that is actually the next step, is actually being able to have all that information there so you can map it out. I'm trying to codify it and put it into a way that's easier to understand. And yeah, no, that's all possible. You can do consults with Denny directly as well. One of the things though that we're looking at is, using nature and using visualizations really to help heal some of these patterns. So even looking at, those grandparents that we don't know, and, how do we heal all the damages that might have been done that we know about and all of those that we don't know about? How do we heal those parts of ourselves that require healing? Well, there's things that we can do to actually feel, to literally say, I want to feel, what did my great grandmother feel? Or how did my grandmother feel? And literally just stay quiet and start to feel, okay, I know it's this part of the body or whatever. And it's been an interesting journey because I've found things just pop in and it's like, wow, it's making connections. And so I might not have, and in your family, that was a pretty horrific relationship between her father's mother and her father. So it's maybe not so horrific in your family, but there's things that might be subtle, or you know, where am I unloving? Where am I afraid to head something on because, you know, I'm afraid of that person and I don't want that conflict. So there's little things that we can be personally responsible for that are part of our family tree, and also in the global world, if we can each do our part to be fully responsible for every feeling that comes in and ask to feel more of those feelings, then that's a huge step towards healing ourselves, our families, our future generations, and the planet. And some of that actually can be done through, you know, just asking for that help, but also through nature. So looking at, okay, can I breathe in energy up and energy out? Can I actually just do a meditation, literally, where I'm breathing in minerals or plants or animal energies and asking them to just come down and clear through my whole body and bring me, you know, whatever was missing in my family or in myself to help heal all of those parts of my body. So it's very complex and very simple. It's really about the desire to heal whatever was in the past and bring something into the world that's positive. Denny, did you want to finish?
So the answer to your question is yes, we're going to provide a variety of materials and as much assistance as possible. And we'd like to support people who have a little bit of interest or a medium-sized interest or a lot of interest. So we'll have different detail levels of how much they might do, and then support systems for that to happen. I know we only have about 10 minutes left here of this schedule anyway. And I'd like to, if I can, show you some of these. Let's see.
Yeah, so some of this is, the programs will actually be classes, so you can actually learn how to identify irises, including yourself. And then how to map out those birth orders, or at least even understand what first, second, third born are and how that relates to your family or your children's family, and then combining some of those systems, or just simply how to do healings and visualizations. And so we're going to just show you this.
These are just metaphors. This to me is the number one girl, and I'll show you what I mean in a bit more. A number one girl is like called the element of the earth. She's the bottom, she's the foundation. Sometimes I call her the rock, the mountain. She holds the pressure, she bears the burden, she does a lot of very important things. That's why she's mineral kingdom, bones, pelvic cavity, solid. That's the symbology of the brown, is earth oriented. But what I'm most interested in is this little white ball inside of her. And this is really what I want to help your daughter access, is that little white ball is a distinct individuality of who she is. And I'm trying to guide her to the consideration that she has a distinct individuality that's unlike anyone else, which is, by the way, true for everyone. Everybody has a distinction of attributes and composition. So I'm trying to help her get to the distinct individuality who she is by a combination of iris, birth order, symptoms, and gradual support for what that looks like and feels like. Can you, no, I'll have to get it for you. This is, I didn't put it on the PowerPoint. And it looks like this. This is number 1. This is number 3. That's called number 5. Number 1 is father's mother. You saw that. Number 3 was father's father's mother. a great-grandmother. Number 5 is father's mother's mother, and I know that these are like father's father's mother, number 3, father's mother's mother, number 5. These 3 grandmothers, they do so much work. This one, like the minerals of the body, is responsible for remembering everything. This also rules the reproductive tract, the lower part of the body.
Remind us which one that is.
That's number 1.
And that's who's?
That's father's mother.
That's father's mother. Okay, can you, and then they do the reproductive and the.
Pelvic cavity and things in the bottom, and a whole bunch of other important things like the will to survive.
Memory, you said too.
Memory as a whole. She basically holds all of the ancestral memory. And her job is to reproduce it. Wait, did you get that?
I think I'm getting it.
So if she holds the ancestral pain and suffering, she is bound to reproduce it. Now, this is an important principle, because whatever she holds, she reproduces. Now, this also is the quality of individual distinction. Sometimes you call it the will to survive. I don't call it the will to survive anymore, because it's not possible for her to die. I mean, the distinction of one's existence as an individual, soul or otherwise, that no matter what happens, you can't lose it. That's my attitude about this part that she holds. Now, the cool thing is, anything that she actually assimilates, she reproduces. So if she learns to laugh, she reproduces it. If she learns joy or she learns love, she reproduces it automatically. So eventually, whatever, if you want to call it, degree of love she has, it's automatically reproduced all the time. So if you could add to her degree of love, it's automatically reproduced. Then the second one actually builds the physical body.
Remind us who that is?
3.
3, so that's
That's
the
father's mother.
father's mother.
Now, she is very important because she does all of the healing in the body. She is basically regenerating the whole body all the time, not part of the time. 100% of the time, she's reinventing and healing the body. She's a very cool grandmother to spend time with because she's in regeneration. She also does assimilation. Now, when she has emotional memories, very powerful emotional memories, and they are of a intended basis. Say you and I one day might learn to be friends, right? Well, we're not there yet, right? But we're learning to be able to appreciate, to know, and understand. If we arrive at a place where the circulation of appreciation between us is actually life-sustaining, right now that might be called a community. Can a community be life-sustaining of each other's children? Yes. Can we have a loving community that has justice and harmony and shares resources, cuddles each other, heals wounds, has law, you get the general idea? That's 3. 3 is about a consolidation of families that produce health and well-being for everybody in the community. That's what this one represents. That's why it's so important. If she learns something, she automatically gives it to the first one. So if you have a social basis of what kind of interaction will you and I have as a community, that's being remembered. If it's stay away from me because you're infectious or you could be, that's also remembered. I mean, I have compassion for small children going to school who can't go to recess without a mask or can't talk to each other, don't touch anymore, don't wrestle, play, laugh, and run. I mean, that's what we're teaching our children is a little bit tragic, but that's a whole other story. Now, all it is, if you think of a family for a moment, we'll call it a number 10. There's 10 people that you're regulating in a family. When you get to the experience of I think it's probably this one. Is it? Yes.
No, it's just coming down.
So I'm saying that by the time, this is an odd form of math, by the time it gets to here, it's about a 1 in 10,000. So 10,000 increase from a 10 to a 3 is there's about 10,000 people in a community. Even though you have a family of 10, you have 10,000 people around you that you may or may not know. But the quality of that community will affect your family, and your quality of your family affects the community. Now there's another family that's larger than that, and if the actual dimensions of the circle were larger than that, the fifth one is global. What does that mean? Somebody who does a family, tries to do it in a community, now wants to do it on a much larger scale. What does that mean? Well, that means that one of my grandmothers is really responsible for how I relate to myself and my own family. Another grandmother is related to how I relate to nature around me, things I can touch and see and feel, people, situations I can talk to. Another grandmother is responsible for something much larger. And I call that the compassion for all living things. Your daughter, one day, will have a compassion for all living things, because she's in a position that eventually goes from her own personal suffering, where she wants to change the suffering in other people around her, which I'm really encouraging. But I know that one day she's going to want the whole world to be happy and healthy and peaceful and harmonic. How would I support that long-term encouragement for her to do that? By the way, I have the same thing. I have a 1 girl, I have a 3 and a 5. How good am I at being global? Global also incorporates culture, races, religions, things seen and unseen, all living things on the earth. How am I feeling about birds, animals, nature? Not very good. What have we done as a culture? Well, generally not very good. So are we running overtime? Okay, I'll just do a little more, and I promise I will be done eventually. I can't promise when that's going to be. Okay, so I'll hurry this forward and go to this one. Well,
Yeah. That's good.
you want to use that one?
Yeah.
This has 3 parts: mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, animal kingdom. We blow each of these up and we basically educate people to appreciate more of the minerals in their body, of which we have them. And the plant kingdom corresponds to the nerves, muscles, ligaments, and connective tissue. And the animal kingdom, we have trillions of them inside of us, 500 species of bacteria in the mouth. You know you have that many. So this is how to learn to feel these different parts of self. And I'll just leave that there because we're over.
Yes, can I wrap it up?
You can.
So if we think about what this last part that Denny's talking about, it's looking at those birth orders. So even if we're 1, 2, or 3, wherever we are, the aspiration is actually to understand ourselves, to be able to actually go from the I of who we are to a we, the collective or that community, which is aspiring to the 3 level, which is also somewhat related to, say, the 3rd born, or 5, which is going to all of us. So how we can move through where we started from, which was our family dynamics or our initial imprint, but how can we take our beautiful imprint and be able to move it to a place where we're able to feel a community, serve a community, and then be able to take that beyond our communities. So we thank you very much for listening in, and we will keep you posted on all the different programs and the different offerings and different classes so that you can understand all of this in ways that can help your children, your clients, patients, or others. So thank you again.